welcome to Macros with Mythili, our weekly half-hour program where we take a hard look at major macroeconomic developments in India and overseas. A major development in the past few days is the revision of GDP numbers for the three-year period 2011-12 to 2013-14. The revision followed the change in the base year from 2004-5 earlier to 2011-12. As a result, the GDP growth in 2013-14 has shot up from 4.7% earlier to 6.9%. What explains the sharp increase? Is the CSO to blame? Or is there something about GDP compilation that makes revisions endemic not only in India but also in advanced economies like the US? And most important of all, what are the policy implications of such revisions when it comes to policy making? And who better to discuss all this than the man who is responsible for it all, for compiling the GDP estimates and perhaps the other macroeconomic data in the country as well, TCA Anant, Chief Statistician, Government of India. Welcome to the show, Anant. Well, you've got us all foxed, but before I proceed and ask you about the nitty-gritty, can you tell us in a simple sentence, is the economy in far better shape now than we thought earlier?
You know, the best way I can answer that is, in a very real sense, the economy is the same as it was in our earlier form of measurement. But the difference is that we are measuring it better. Now, does this reflect a better position for the economy or not is a more complicated question, and I'll explain why. How good an economy is at any point of time is not a cross-sectional picture which we state, but usually a picture which a picture or a statement which we develop based on experience gained over time through the assessment of time series data. The new revised GDP series is not yet of a long enough series for us to make that sort of time series assessment which people typically do when they say the economy is doing well or doing poorly. All that I can say is, yes, the growth rate estimate has gone up, but does it reflect an improved health prognosis for the economy? I think we should wait for a few more numbers in the new series before we jump to conclusions.
Thank you for saying that, because you're much more guarded than most commentators who either jumped in to say the economy is much better or that it's much worse, depending essentially on which side the political ideologies are. But coming to the issue of GDP compilation, GDP, the gross value added of goods and services in an economy in a particular period, normally a year, is an incredibly complex exercise, especially in an economy as complex as India with a large unorganized sector. But for the benefit of our viewers, can you tell us in very simple terms, how was GDP being calculated earlier prior to the latest revision, and what is different about the way you're doing it now?
Fundamentally, the method of compilation remains the same, and I'll explain in what broad sense does it remain the same. In any GDP compilation, we have access to some data which is available regularly and gives us a direct picture on value added. Principally, this relates to information, for example, on government accounts and on accounts submitted regularly by the corporate sector of the economy. We also have, for the manufacturing sector, an additional annual input based on a regular survey which CSO conducts, which is called the Annual Survey of Industries. In these limited cases, we get a direct insight into the value added which is happening in these segments of the economy. In all other segments of the economy, we have to rely on surveys which are conducted infrequently, usually once in every 5 years. So typically what happens is, during the base year, GDP is put together for the base year, combining the information in the regular data sources as well as those in the occasional surveys. Now, the other thing which we do is, this is done once every 5 years. So what do we do in the middle? In the intervening years, we then move the estimate which has been obtained in the base year by relying on a set of indicators or information which is available regularly. Now, during this revision, we have looked at and revised the data available for both the base year calculation and this annual updation.
What is different about the new series?
Government accounts, principally, most of it is the same as before, except that we have now much richer information of local bodies, thanks to an effort which has been put in place over the last 5 years due to some directions from the 13th Finance Commission. In addition, in the corporate sector, we have access now to a much richer database made available through the implementation of the Ministry of MCA 21 program of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which requires companies to file their annual accounts through electronic means. This replaces an earlier method where RBI used to gather a sample of about 2000 companies from which we used to estimate the performance of the overall corporate sector of the economy. These two reflect significant improvements in the regular database of the GDP calculation. Now, moving to what I was talking about, the second part, we used to, for areas in which we did not get regular database, we used to move them on a year-to-year basis, relying on a set of indicators. This time around, we have revised this set of indicators to incorporate one additional source of information which has become available because of e-governance programs on a regular basis with the level of disaggregation which we need. And that is the information available through various indirect tax databases. We are now incorporating information of service taxes, sales taxes and other indirect taxes for the purposes of moving the year-to-year growth in the informal sector or the unorganized sector, if you like, based on the level which we have estimated in the base year, in this case 2011-12.
So basically you have a larger, larger sources, newer sources, and you're covering even those existing sources in a much more comprehensive way, if I understand you right. Is that so? Apart from the revision in the base year price level.
Correct.
But as far as
that's correct.
Okay. But as far as the revision that you've done this time, you're doing it at basic prices as distinct from GDP at factor cost, which was the earlier practice. How is basic prices considered better than factor cost?
This is not so much as better, it's a conceptual issue. The SNA does not recognize the concept of factor cost. Basic prices essentially includes all the elements which go into factor cost, which is all the costs of inputs which are incurred by the producing entity, as well as those taxes which are invariant to the level of production. So any tax, for example, stamp duties and other taxes of this variety, which are invariant to the level of production, these are incorporated by the company in its pricing decision, as against taxes which are levied on value of output, for example, value added tax or service tax, which are taken as over and above the level of costing which is done at the company level. Now, globally the norm is that the tax at the level at which firms make their value added calculations and profit calculations, those have to be taken account of in the value added at basic prices level. In fact, I should point out here, the earlier GDP calculation at factor cost had some elements in certain segments of the economy of basic prices. We are able to do this separation very carefully because our indirect tax database has improved enormously, and we are getting segregation not only by types of taxes but down to the sectoral level, so that we can know which type of tax was contributed in the broad sectoral calculations which are done in national accounts. And that is what has made it possible for us now to comply with the international standard. Earlier we were not in compliance of reporting the GVA at basic prices.
Okay. So now that you brought us up to date, TCA, on what exactly is the change between this time's compilation as compared to the previous, we'll come to the details of this revision a little after the break, but please do bear with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the nitty-gritty of the GDP compilation and what explains the dramatic increase in GDP growth in 2013-14 with the Chief Statistician of India, TCA Anant. Anant, before the break, we were discussing how GDP is calculated and what are the changes that you brought about this time. But one thing that has really caught everybody by surprise, unawares, however you might put it, is the fact that there's been a sharp revision in the GDP growth in FY14. What, to your mind, is a single most important reason for this? Which are the sectors that have contributed for this upward revision? Because in fact, when you look at the details of your press release, you talked about retail trade, etc. But the revision actually is something like 1% to 14%. Was there that kind of increase in the output of retail trade? What really explains a huge increase in your growth for the year 2014?
Let me try to answer your question in two parts. First, if you notice, the GDP estimates show a significant change in the level as well as share of certain sectors in the economy. And the second thing, of course, is the change in the growth rate. Insofar as the level calculations are concerned, substantially the change in levels is accounted for in principally two segments. One is manufacturing and the other is trade. It so happens that these are also the segments in which the changes in growth rates are also the most marked. Principally, the reasons why we see the changes in levels for manufacturing are that we are now assessing the manufacturing sector by something little more than the annual survey of industries which we were doing earlier. We are combining the data of the annual survey of industries with the data which we are getting from corporate sector through the Ministry of Corporate Affairs database. Now, this has meant that earlier we were actually assessing value added purely on an enterprise establishment basis at manufacturing. We are now in a better position to capture what we call enterprise level value added. In other words, for the corporate side of manufacturing, which is quite substantial, we are picking up that part of value addition which takes place above the production factory, and that is quite significant. So, that is one reason why the share of manufacturing has gone up. On trade, conversely, there is a different dynamic at place. When the last revision was taken up, there was no up-to-date database on trade. The reference survey which was used for the last revision was actually from the 99-2000 revision. Those estimates were carried forward and essentially grown by in the intermediate period by a growth factor. This time in 2010-11, we had a survey of trade, and when we compare the 99-2000 survey with the 10-11 survey of NSS, we find that the share of trade would have to come down, and in fact, the overall size of trade in the GDP had to be reduced considerably. That's insofar as the levels are concerned. If we now turn to the growth side, growth in the new series is determined by two elements which have contributed significantly. One is the use of the indirect tax database for assessing growth, and the other is for using the corporate sector database for assessing growth. Now, the principal factor behind this growth being at 6.9 over 4.7 is in manufacturing we see a very significant increase of growth. I forget what the number is, I think it's somewhere about 5.3% or thereabouts from an earlier number of I think 1%. And this is entirely on account of the fact that the corporate database shows much greater buoyancy than what we were earlier projecting it to be. As against this, when we turn to service taxes, the entire buoyancy is in fact seen in indirect taxes, it's buoyancy is seen entirely in one segment, which is trade, hotels, restaurants. In fact, these two groups, manufacturing and trade, hotels and restaurants, account for almost the entire rise in growth rates that you're seeing. And in trade, hotel and restaurants, this is because of the buoyancy which we have seen in indirect tax revenue which are used in these segments.
But Anant, this yes, I agree that you are capturing the data better, but this better capture of data should have happened in 12-13 as well, apart from 13-14. And additionally, if you look at the corroborating evidence, if you look at IIP data, of course your IIP database is 2004-05, but if you look at other corroboratory data in terms of bank credit, in terms of sales, nothing else justifies a kind of sharp increase. So do you not check for the hygiene of the numbers that you get, or do you just take the numbers at face value and just compile them?
No, of course we check the numbers for their hygiene, but let me answer this question differently. Even in the old series, 2012-13 reflected the lowest point in the economy which we had seen up to then. If you recall, in the old series, 2012-13 numbers had come in at a growth rate of about 4.5%. The lowest point was in 2012-13 was also observed from the IIP numbers and so on. 13-14, for a variety of indicators, people had seen improvements in both the IIP numbers as well as other indicators, including tax revenue. For these reasons, there was a sense of 13-14 has been better. Nobody had a sense of how much better. Now, the old series said that the growth rate improved from 4.5 to 4.7. We are seeing that it's increased not from 4.5 but from 4.7 to from 4.7. Instead, we are putting it out at 6.9. The fact is, how bad was 12-13 versus how good it is a function of the underlying series. Since I don't have a back series to back me up, I can't say further than how good 12-13 or how bad 12-13 was relative to the past. I don't have the information of the past. But on the whole, we have tried as far as possible to match the numbers. But please understand, principally we don't look at growth alone when we are looking at numbers. Growth is a derived characteristic. What is much more interesting and much more easy to assess are the levels which are comparing. Are the levels comparable? For example, I'll give you one example of how one can get some assessment of levels. You get an estimate of the size of the economy, which we did do in 11-12 from the survey data. We also compared it with the size of the economy which comes out from the implied resource base, which the indirect tax collection is. If the two match, we feel that we've assessed 11-12 carefully. Then the issue is, have the parameters on which we have assessed growth on, or the change from one year to the next. The feeling was that as against our earlier indirect measures, where, for example, trade used to be moved on something called the gross trading index, which was linked to the physical production volume of certain sectors. Now, the tax database, on the other hand, moves them on the basis of their tax collections. The feeling is that physical production does not capture value-added growth as well as tax growth does. So we shifted to using the tax growth as an indicator, which was more buoyant than the physical production growth. So it is these sorts of technical reasons which explain the change. But that's why when I started off, I was being very cautious. I don't have a long enough time series to assess the growth dynamics of the new series. Whether a particular growth rate is good or bad is only with reference to the history of the dynamics which have been occurred in that series. Without the history, picking a single number and saying that this is good or bad would be, I think, premature.
Absolutely. It's a little premature for us to say whether growth was really markedly better, how much better. But I'm afraid on that note, we have to slip into another very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the nitty-gritty of the GDP compilation and the sharp increase in GDP growth in 2013-14 with the Chief Statistician of India, TCA Anant. Anant, before the break, you were explaining how GDP growth in 2013-14 shot up so dramatically. But the fact is that with the same database, the revision is entirely because the absolute numbers for 12-13 came down. So how did the absolute numbers for 12-13 come down, to your mind?
The principal factor behind the decline is the value addition which takes place in the sector called trade, hotels, restaurants, and something else. I think it's repair.
No, but why did the number come down in 12-13? Why did that absolute number come down in 12-13?
Let me explain. This particular category is estimated in national accounts by the following technique. In the base year, in 99-2000, the estimate was done using a survey of NSS on the informal sector which had been done. In subsequent years, it was moved using a set of indicators relating to the production volume. There was no survey done of trade, informal trade, until 2010-11. Now, when we compared the 2010-11 survey and its implied value addition in trade with the 99-2000 number of value addition trade, it became clear that we had overstated the value addition occurring in the trading sector.
So you were basically making an adjustment.
We are making an adjustment to trade. That is what led to a significant reduction in the contribution of trade to overall GDP. Compensating this, certain sectors, there were also upward revisions as well. You can see that in the details.
So does that mean the structure of, going by the data, it would seem that the structure of the economy has changed. The share of manufacturing is much higher than we anticipated earlier. Is that a right conclusion to draw, or do we still have to wait for a longer series?
No, I think it is correct that we were probably undercounting the share of manufacturing, but please understand what this undercounting is account. The manufacturing sector includes in it all those organized sector companies which are whose principal identification is with manufacturing. It seems we were understating their value added because we were not including that part of the corporate value addition which takes place over and above the production level, maybe on account of marketing, on account of other aspects of company strategy which add to the value addition beyond the production level. Now, this is not picked up in our ASI database, but should have been included correctly in the value addition of the manufacturing sector. So, we are probably understating the contribution of this sector. So, the level would have gone up. Long run, does it make a difference? I am not so sure, because it depends upon if the part which we were excluding is more dynamic, or if it has higher growth potential than the part which we were including. I don't have enough knowledge about the way the value chain in manufacturing has been changing over time to actually comment on this at the moment.
Okay, so basically the new data is a result of better technology, better techniques, better methodology, and capturing a larger share of the sector from whatever data you have available. But the fact is, Anant, at the end of the day, policy formulation is based on whatever data one gets. So what kind of policy can one expect either from the Reserve Bank of India if you don't know whether the economy is growing rapidly, are we near the potential rate of growth? Likewise from the government also would not know. A policy that makes sense for a slowing economy would be grossly out of place for an economy that is growing rapidly. So is there something we can do to ensure that, these kind of revisions don't completely kind of pull the rug from under the feet of both the government as well as the Reserve Bank of India?
This is a hard question to answer. Ideally for policy, I should, have long time series, and I should be able to maintain my time series over long periods of time. This revision amounts to what amounts to in technical terms as a structural break in the time series. Should we have gone in for the structural break? The answer is yes, because if you don't do this at the time of the base revision, the divergence between reality and what you are measuring becomes more and more, and you are eventually left with a series which nobody relies on. But the structural break does create a challenge for the policymaker in the years around the structural break, because your earlier rules of thumb are not good guide maps to what to do in the years immediately around a structural break. In this time, when you have a structural break in the underlying series, a lot of caution and care needs to be used in developing policy guidance from these numbers. It's not that it can't be done, it just needs very careful analysis.
It's just that, Anant, if you were, the doctor has to administer the medicine, the thermometer has to record the correct temperature. So it's in your hands to tell us what is the correct temperature of the economy. So can you think of any way of getting us slightly better, more up-to-date, comprehensive data in real time? One quick answer.
No, the answer is, in terms of data in real time, we have actually improved considerably. We are, by using the corporate database, our updation process is now much faster than the ASI timeline of production. We will of course continue to use the ASI, but the general updation will be much faster, and we hope that revisions in manufacturing as a in the consequence will be much smaller. In other areas, we are also moving separately to improve timeliness of key indicators, particularly in the area of employment. These are exercises which are parallelly underfoot and are part of the process of giving you more data for policy making.
So as far as getting better and better data, it's basically a work in progress. Thank you so much, TCA, for joining us. Thank you very much for throwing light also on the sharp revision, because frankly, most of us were very foxed, and now at least we have some better understanding on how data is compiled and what we can hope for and look for when we get the next set of data. Thank you so much also for watching, but we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.